Hello, everyone, and welcome to Other Stages episode 14. For today's show, I have some brand new music to play. Plus, my guest will be recording artist PC Munoz, and we're going to hear some of his music as well. So, what does it mean for an artist to find their own unique voice? Well, whether you're a poet or a painter, whether you make music or macrame, finding that unique spark that distinguishes you from everybody else, well, that's kind of the holy grail for a creative person. For some, that unique voice seems to be innate from birth, and for others, well, it takes us a little time. So today I'd like to start with a brand new composition. Like any creative person, I find inspiration from all kinds of places, but surprisingly, I find most of my musical inspiration from a Polish post-rock instrumental band called Distant Dream. So in addition to the usual links I leave in the show description, plus some links to find out more about PC Munoz, you'll also find a link to find out more about the music of Distant Dream. This piece is called Awakening. Shows like this are made possible by you. If you're someone who gives from time to time, please consider me next time around. You can find my Venmo, PayPal, and Patreon links in the show description. PC Munoz is a recording artist, producer, and writer based in San Francisco. His diverse body of work as an artist and producer include Grammy-nominated contemporary classical music, acclaimed funk and avant-garde projects, and compositions for film, dance, and multimedia. He is a current Mosaic America Fellow and a former board governor of the San Francisco chapter of the Recording Academy. And in 2013, he became an Equilibrium Fellow at the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, Eileen and I met PC Munoz several years ago at the Rogue Festival, and he was playing in our old studio down in the Tower District. His band was setting up, and the only piece of instrumentation that I actually recognized was a drum kit. The bass player was actually a vocalist with a pitch-shifting device that dropped his voice down an octave, and the synthesizer guy didn't have a keyboard one. He was controlling the synthesizers from an iPhone, so I had no idea what to expect. But then they started to play, and it was absolutely awesome. So please enjoy my conversation with PC Munoz. My guest today is San Francisco recording artist PC Munoz. PC, thank you for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So when you were a kid growing up, when did you first kind of realize that music was going to be your passion?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I always loved listening to music, like listening to the radio. You remember back in the days when you would listen to
sure.
radio and you would tape songs that you liked. And I had a blackboard where I would listen to Casey Kasem and write down the charts, I'd write down who's number one. And it was big in my house, so I always listened to music. So I was always moved by it. I didn't really imagine myself doing it, though, until maybe around third or fourth grade. And it was actually my third grade teacher who noticed that I was always bopping around everywhere. So I had pencils and pens, and I was always be pop, pop, da, da. And at that time, music lessons were still free in California public schools. Right. And my third grade teacher said, hey, you might want to sign up for the drum lessons because you're always bopping around and hitting stuff, and you seem to have a lot of rhythm in you. And I don't know if it was getting on her nerves. She didn't seem like she was angry when she said it. She was more like being a mentor, like, you might want to check into that. And so I did. And from there, exploring drums and rhythm and things, I became a music maker, but it took a little while.
Were there any childhood influences or things about your childhood that influenced your decision?
I had a neighbor who lived across the street, and he went to Berkeley, Berklee, music school in Boston, and we were really close with his parents, and his name is Skylark, and we were really, really close with his parents, and he was he was studying bass. He was a jazz and R&B bassist, and I would go over to his house all the time and look and watch him in awe, and all the practice he would put in, and he would monitor my listening habits. If I was listening to way too much top 40, he would go, here's some weather report. Go listen to this, get this in you. So he kept me. He got me on a path of listening to a lot of music that he felt was like what serious musicians ought to be listening to. So he was actually really, really important. And he went on to be the bassist for the Doobie Brothers for many, many years. And he wrote songs for Earth, Wind & Fire and Denise Williams and a bunch of people. So watching his career from across the street was really important as a younger guy, seeing his trajectory. He was really important in terms of getting serious about my instrument too.
That's very good. So did you feel that your family, as you were growing up, were they really supportive or cautious or maybe even discouraging?
Well, that's connected to Skylark's success, actually. I think they were always supportive, came to my concerts, and they were always interested in what I was doing, my parents. And definitely as I started performing as a solo artist and with groups, they always came and always and still do come to shows when I'm
That's
doing
neat.
them. But I think watching what happened with Skylark, and that was, as you know, it's like it's so funny that the one person that was really mentoring me ended up having this great success. So they could kind of see, oh, if you work hard and you keep at it, things do work, and you got to put the work in, because they saw how hard Skylark worked. He was constantly practicing. He was constantly networking and hustling his music. And actually, one of the first bands he was in that I was kind of around was he was with Sheila E. I was playing drums with him, and that was my first exposure to her, and kind of learning about her before she became a solo artist. She was already doing tons of percussion stuff, but before she became a solo artist and associated with Prince, that was interesting to see kind of the behind the scenes there.
Yeah, what can you tell us about the genesis of your own style?
Mm. Well, I think it started there because I still have that same affinity for. I still love pop, the well-constructed pop song.
Hmm.
I still do. I like the skill and craft that goes into it, and I also really love people who push the envelope with music and sound. And I think that's where the balance came in with my sort of natural inclination towards I love hearing a really well-crafted song, but then with Scarlett coming along, going, listen to what this guy's doing on the keyboard, listen to what this person's doing on the sax, and oh, they're taking these solos over these complicated, harmonies, and I was taking all of that in and going, oh, okay, and I realized they don't have to live in two different worlds. I think that was a big thing for me. You didn't
Mm.
have to have those things live in two different worlds. So you'll notice on a lot of my recorded work, especially full-length albums, there might be songs that are straight up have hooky choruses and things like that, but then the next one might be very avant-garde noise exploration. And I think for better or for worse, that's where I ended up with the being open to lots of different forms of musical expression.
How do you feel you manage in that work-life balance game?
Yeah, that's a perennial, as you mentioned, that's a perennial issue for all creatives, I think. And I think you have to learn how to be okay with that balance. You have to learn how to go, okay, at some points in your life there might be a little more of the bill paying and a little more of the stuff that you might not be super passionate about, but but still keep helps you be able to do what the other stuff that you want to do. I've reached a point where I've always really liked teaching and running education programs. So I'm at a point where I'm able to do both my creative work and run an education department at a music venue here in the Bay Area, I balance it very well, and feel like I get to do all of it.
Mm.
So that's been good. Very often in my life I've done one or the other, or some of this and some of that, and I feel like when I'm doing too much of one, I miss it. Like there was a period when all I was doing was releasing work and touring and stuff like that, and I did miss being in front of people teaching and doing
Mm.
things. And I found, if I'm the opposite, if I'm just teaching, I'm also missing performing. So I feel like for me anyway, a life that kind of combines both of those works for me.
We have a couple of clips, and why don't we drop one of those in right now?
Okay.
Okay, so PC, you have projects that are not just purely yours. You're collaborating with a lot of people,
Mm.
and one that really caught my eye that you brought my attention to because it's a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I am a former addict in recovery, and you have a beautiful project that you're working on. What can you tell us about the Creative High?
Oh yeah, so the Creative High is a film that's being made by some filmmakers here in the Bay Area, here in San Francisco. Um, it's directed by a woman named Adriana Martione, and she is I hope I said her name right, her last name Martione. Um, and it's really wonderful. So it's a film that follows a group of people in recovery and how they use art to help them through recovery.
Mm.
So I'm kind of a music consultant and producer in the film, and so I've several of my songs have been licensed for it, and then other associated artists or music that I've produced or helped produce is also are also in the film, and and then also there's some original music that's being recorded for it. So it's a really beautiful project, and I'm excited about it. Probably won't come out till later this year, later in 2021 or possibly 2022. I'm not exactly sure of the timeline, but we're starting to wrap it up now. And
You also have an album out called the Pandemic Tracks.
oh
Tell us
yeah,
a little bit about that.
yeah. Well, it's not an album. It's just a series of a bunch of singles that came out
Okay.
on Bandcamp during. I started, like everybody else, during lockdown. I found myself with some time,
Hmm.
so I mean, my work was continuing and different projects were continuing, but I also was like, okay, I have some time and I have limited recording. I work a lot in recording studios,
Hmm.
and for many years it was my full-time job to be in recording studios producing for record labels and stuff. And but I found myself at home without a real studio. I got pretty spoiled going to very nice studios
Hmm.
to do my work. So I looked around and said, "What do I have?" Well, I have my laptop, a couple of mics, and whatever gear I happen to have at home. And I thought, that's actually good. Like, I'll see what I can do
Hmm.
with this. So that was the first thing I did, was a piece called Dollar Store Steak,
Mm.
and that was kind of like a electro funk piece, mostly instrumental.
Let's move on to the Right Starter. I looked at
Oh,
that link, and that's a very intriguing project.
yeah, Right Starter is a duo project I have with the rapper Dem One, who's based in San Jose. I've lived in San Francisco for many years, but I'm originally from San Jose. And or I say I'm an orchard son, which is from San Jose. So I grew up when it was still covered with blossoms and
Mm.
orchards everywhere. Um, so yeah, Dem One and I have been working together for a while, and we thought well, first we thought we should name ourselves as a duo, because we
Hmm.
keep doing stuff and it's always PC Munoz and Dem One. We thought, well, let's call ourselves something. So we named ourselves after this Public Enemy song called Right Starter, and through that project, a bunch of different things. We did a project that actually ended up becoming another thing called Blood Moon Orchestra with the Vietnamese virtuoso named Van Anh Vo,
Mm.
that does a lot of things here in the Bay Area and actually all over the world. And then we did this one thing that was called One Voice, One Drum, where we just wanted to bring it down to the simplest and earliest human tools possible, the drum and the voice.
Mm.
And we did that. And right now we have a new project called Black Pacific, which explores the intersection of Pacific Islanders and the African American community and the different journeys of our families specifically. So it'll be that it's I would call it it's sort of a video essay. It's not really it's I guess it's kind of a film, but it's more like a video essay. Like you hear a lot of writing, you hear a lot of music and voiceover, and you see a lot of images. And we're still putting it together with our friend Christopher Woon, Paper Sun, who's a producer and filmmaker. And there's a whole bunch of people that are also collaborating on that project. So yeah, Right Starter's been great for both performing and creating and working really close with one who I have a lot of respect and admiration for.
But what do you think it means to be a successful artist?
Mm, great question. I think, you know, I think the artist gets to decide that.
Hmm,
I do. I
I
think
like
the
that.
artist gets to decide that because, you know, if you have a realistic view of yourself and what you're doing, you know, there are varying forms or varying ways that success sort of manifests, you know. And like we were speaking earlier before we started recording about how people think when they think about professional musicians or they think about musicians, they think, you know, extremely famous pop stars
Hmm.
or people barely making it busking on the street. And right in the middle, there's so many people that are doing fine being professional musicians and so with a combination of teaching and you know playing different sorts of gigs and releasing work if they compose and performing in different ways and there's just so many different ways that musicians make their living and part of I think being a busy musician is to being able to be organized about organizing your day. So one of the things that I learned when I was working with the San Jose Symphony, where I was directing an education program there, is I saw how symphony musicians organized their day, and it was nonstop work. And I thought, oh, that's how you do it. Like they would get up. Like I remember because I was just working on my programs, and I would say, can I have a meeting with you? And they would say, well, I have you know I have this rehearsal from 7 to 8 in the morning, and then I teach from 9 to 11, and then I have a meeting with the symphony org people, and then I have a chamber rehearsal at this time, and then I have this, then I just got to practice for 2 hours, and then I have this meeting with the symphony. Oh, and then I have one more student, and then I can see you at 5:15, 6 before I go to the symphony rehearsal. I thought, then it gave me this glimpse of because I was still at that time I was already doing professional music work, but I hadn't seen how a working musician does it. And I thought, oh, it was a really big eye opener. I thought, okay, so you basically hustle and make it happen for you. And I think that artists do have to be generous with themselves in terms of, you know, oh, you might have had dreams of being, you know, Paul McCartney, but Paul McCartney is a very special dude. Like if you, you know, if you don't reach Paul McCartney, well, it's okay, really. It's just fine.
What can you tell us about what's maybe ruminating in your mind and coming up after all this other stuff is in the can, as they say?
Right. Gee, well, you know, yeah, Black Pacific, excuse me, Black Pacific is front of mind right now because
Hmm.
it's something we're going to finish this year, and also I'm working on a commission or a series of commissions for the Hugo House in Seattle, which I think that performance will be done by the time this airs. But it's something I'm excited about finishing up and putting out in the world. And I've always had I've been sort of cataloging a bunch of country songs
Hmm.
for an album of country songs called The Countryside, and that's still like in the back of my head of some sort of project to explore where it's just full on country and
Hmm.
as I have the songs and some of them are pretty cool and I don't really want to let that one go yet so I
Hmm.
got to see if that'll be the next thing that I work on and then there's also I'm really getting into these literature on video things. I think I sent you one thing called I Remember Her. So
Hmm.
there's a piece called I Remember Her, which I premiered with the Berkeley Art Museum in January, just an excerpt. And I'm going to finish that, and I think I'll be doing more of those as well, more literature, sound design, video type things that I find really exciting because you get to tell the story, but it includes music, and I get to use my voice in it, and so it'll probably all of those things will probably be in the mix
Hmm.
going forward.
Well, we have run out of time for today's interview, and I want to thank you very, very much for being on the show today, and we'll see you again very, very soon.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
My next piece of music is called Exosphere. What in the world is the exosphere? Well, it's an area of space that is beyond really the measurable atmosphere, and it's actually a zone where satellites and even the International Space Station orbit. It's an area where you can still find atmospheric molecules, but they're not dense enough to actually behave like an atmosphere. So, among scientists, this is a bit of a controversy. Some say it's actually part of our atmosphere because there are atmospheric particles there, and others say no, no, it's beyond the measurable atmosphere. To me, I picture the exosphere as being a place that's strange and surprisingly peaceful. So, here's my original composition called Exosphere. So when I was 13 years old, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I knew exactly how my life would go. I very naively thought that everything that was in place at that moment would still be there when my time came. I did not consider that the world is an ever changing place and that I might change my mind. So, with all the wisdom of a 13-year-old boy, I formulated my very specific recipe for establishing my place in the world. I was going to be an organist. I would work in an organ store, play at Pizza and Pipes, and maybe I'd hold down a church gig on Sundays. My master plan started falling apart almost immediately. The home organ business came to a stop, as if you shut off a faucet, blew out a candle, hit a brick wall, stick a fork in it because we're done. But at about that same time, I got a gig playing the organ at the local hockey games. Well, one out, one in. Then I finally got a gig at Pizza and Pipes, but by that time the place was in rapid decline, so my time and my earnings from Pizza and Pipes didn't last very long. But at about that same time, my church gig transformed from being a Sunday only play the organ experience to full-time music director. So as it turned out, I succeeded in kind of putting something together that resembled my master plan. Now, as I was putting my master plan together with all of the segues and left turns that it went through, I was also dabbling in the rock band game. You see, back at the beginning, I discovered that hockey game, pizza parlor, Sunday morning organ player guy who works in an organ store was not cool to my peers. And of course, as a teenager, that was the most important thing in the world, especially since I was seeking a romantic partner. So in addition to my fascination with the organ, I've also have a fascination with electronic music and synthesizers. And in the 1970s and 80s, if you could play at all and you could work a synthesizer, you were in. So while I was working the organ game, I was simultaneously working the rock band angle. I had a band in high school. We played covers and a few originals. I auditioned for a local band that had a hit album. And as a young adult, I played in several different cover bands that did fairly well. But one by one, my little collection of rock band and organ playing gigs slowly evaporated until I was left with just church music director. So you might be thinking, hey, I did it. I succeeded in becoming a professional musician playing the instrument of my choice. But you know, at no point in this entire adventure did I ever pause and ask, what's my unique voice as an artist? In fact, I was well into my 40s before I ever explored that question. You see, in pursuing what I thought I wanted, I ended up trying to mold myself into every situation. I thought I wanted to work in an organ store, but to what end? I thought I wanted to play at Pizza and Pipes, but did I want to play there or did I want to play that organ? It was really the same at the church. The only reason I was in a church was to play the organ. I didn't actually have any particular interest in church life. So I spent the better part of my life trying to fit in rather than trying to figure out who I am. Now, when I was a real little kid, my grandfather was a tremendous storyteller. He seemed to have this endless list of stories from his youth. Most of his stories involved his best friend, a guy named Johnny Jones. Johnny was a bit of a crackpot, to put it mildly. And I think my grandfather hung around with Johnny simply because the world was funnier with Johnny in it. I always admired my grandfather's talent for storytelling, and I really wanted to follow in his storytelling footsteps. But it was 2007 before I ever gave it a try. As a teenager, I was fascinated with ambient music, but I never thought to write any of my own until just a couple years ago. It's only now that I'm truly embracing my own unique artistic voice. Have I found it? Well, not completely. But I also think that the artist's voice is forever evolving. For most of my life, I looked at who I am from a practical perspective. This was drilled into me by my family, who you were was what you did. If you delivered the mail, well, then you were a mailman. That's that. You couldn't do something and be something else. Well, thankfully, I've come to understand that what I do to pay the bills isn't necessarily who I am. I do all kinds of things to pay the bills. Most are related to who I am, but they are not in and of themselves who I am. I am a musician, storyteller. My personal definition is that I tell stories, sometimes with words, sometimes with music, but most of the time with a little of both. Finding my unique voice, both in word and in music, is the journey that I will be on for the rest of my days. I have only one rule, and that is to try and be a little bit better today than I was yesterday, because you only live once. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and be sure to like and comment on today's show. For my last musical selection, I wanted to play something lyrical and beautiful, and I picked Handel's famous Largo. Now, I used to play an organ arrangement of this that was very organy, and I've recently kind of re-examined my view of this music, and now I'm playing a version that is a little closer to its original operatic aria origins. So here is Handel's Largo. On next week's show, my guest will be the poet Adid Medina. She's a fascinating person. She also loves science, and we are going to have a great conversation with her. You don't want to miss that. Thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you next week.